Picture a time when the entire world seemed to hang in the balance, when kingdoms rose and fell, and the line between salvation and ruin was drawn by the edge of a sword. We often imagine the Crusades through the clatter of armor and the charge of knights, but behind these epic struggles stood figures history has largely forgotten: women whose wisdom, courage, and vision quietly shaped the destiny of empires. The Crusading Orders, legendary institutions like the Knights Templar and the Hospitallers, are celebrated as bastions of martial strength and male devotion, yet their rise was fueled by something far more complex and deeply human: the influence of extraordinary women who operated in the shadows of power. These were not side characters in a grand drama, but architects of influence: queens who granted lands and legitimacy, mystics who lent divine favor to earthly missions, and strategists who navigated the treacherous politics of faith and warfare. Their contributions wove through every aspect of the crusading world, from financing military campaigns to offering counsel that altered the course of battles and treaties. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to meet 25 of these remarkable women, each a force in her own right, each a story waiting to be reclaimed from the margins of history. We'll explore how they defied the constraints of their era, leveraging everything from diplomacy and devotion to sheer determination to support the orders that stood at the heart of medieval Christendom. You'll encounter tales of unsung heroines whose actions echoed across centuries, women whose lives remind us that history is never as simple as it seems, and that some of its most powerful currents flowed just beneath the surface. So settle in and open your imagination to a side of the Crusades you've likely never considered, one where influence wore many faces, and legacy was written not only in blood and battle, but in faith, foresight, and the quiet strength of those history chose to overlook. Before we can truly grasp the remarkable contributions of the women who shaped the Crusading Orders, we need to step back and understand the world they operated within. Picture the birth of these legendary institutions not in isolation, but as a response to a profound human need. In the wake of the First Crusade's capture of Jerusalem in 1099, thousands of devout Christians began making the perilous journey to the Holy Land. These pilgrims, filled with faith but often unarmed and vulnerable, faced bandits, harsh terrain, and hostile forces along the way. It was from this desperate need for safety and care that the first orders emerged. The Knights Hospitaller, formerly known as the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, began around 1070 as a monastic order running a hospital in Jerusalem to care for sick and poor pilgrims. Their mission was one of mercy and charity. Shortly after, around 1118, a new order formed with a different, more militant purpose: the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, who we know as the Knights Templar, were founded by a small band of knights sworn to protect those same pilgrims on the dangerous roads to holy sites. They took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, creating a startling new hybrid, the warrior monk. What made these groups so unique was their dual nature. They were both religious orders answerable only to the Pope and military forces commanded by their own Grand Masters. This gave them a level of independence that often made kings and bishops uneasy. They weren't tied to any single kingdom. They were international organizations with a divine mandate, and as their reputation grew, so did their wealth and reach. Donations of land and money poured in from pious nobles across Europe who wanted to support the holy cause. This created a sprawling economic network. The orders soon managed vast estates, farms, and vineyards from England to Italy. They built churches, mills, and warehouses. They became early bankers, offering letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to travel without carrying large sums of money, a service that made them incredibly powerful financiers. The Teutonic Knights, founded later during the Third Crusade around 1190, followed a similar path, initially running a field hospital and then evolving into a formidable military order that would eventually focus on crusades in the Baltic region. This complex ecosystem of faith, finance, and force could not function on the battlefield alone. Its engine room was back home on those European estates. Someone had to manage those properties, collect rents, oversee harvests, negotiate with local merchants, and ensure a steady flow of resources, food, weapons, funds, and new recruits to the front lines in the east. This is where our story truly begins, because a great deal of this essential, behind-the-scenes work fell to women. In a society with rigid gender roles, the practical needs of sustaining a crusade created unexpected opportunities. Noblewomen, often left in charge of family domains while their husbands and fathers were away on campaign, became crucial managers of these economic networks. They acted as stewards for lands donated to the orders, they made strategic decisions about resources, and they used their social influence to encourage further donations and support from their peers. Furthermore, many women found ways to engage spiritually with the order's missions. They joined affiliated convents, prayed for the success of the Crusades, provided care for returning wounded knights, and even offered visionary endorsements that lent a powerful aura of divine favor to the military efforts. Their influence was not a sidebar to history. It was woven into the very fabric of these organizations, providing the stable foundation upon which all their legendary conquests and castles were built. So what did influence actually look like for a woman in the High Middle Ages? It's a question that requires us to set aside modern definitions of power. This wasn't about holding an official title or commanding armies on the field, though some certainly did. Instead, their authority flowed through more nuanced yet equally critical channels. For the women who shaped the Crusading Orders, power was a tapestry woven from 4 distinct threads: political savvy, economic control, spiritual authority, and intellectual or cultural leadership. First, consider political influence. In an era where marriages forged empires, noble and royal women were the linchpins of international alliances. A queen like Melisend of Jerusalem wasn't just a figurehead, she was a ruler who held and exercised genuine sovereign power. From that position, she could grant something immensely valuable to the military orders: legitimacy. A charter from a queen bestowing lands or tax exemptions wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a royal endorsement that elevated an order's status, protected it from local bishops or jealous barons, and integrated it into the very fabric of the kingdom's defense. These women acted as diplomatic shields and strategic advisors, often mediating disputes between powerful men and ensuring the orders had a seat at the table when critical decisions about war and peace were being made. Then there is the undeniable power of economic resources. Many of these women controlled vast wealth, whether as heiresses to great estates, as widows managing their late husband's holdings, or as abbesses overseeing rich monastic lands. This economic independence allowed them to become the financial backbone of the crusading movement. Their donations were not merely symbolic, they were the bricks and mortar of castles like Crac des Chevaliers, the silver that paid for swords and armor, and the funds that supplied hospitals with medicine and food. A noblewoman like Beatrice of Burburg didn't just write a check, she actively managed Templar properties, turning agricultural profits into a steady stream of support for the fight in the Holy Land. This hands-on economic stewardship was absolutely vital, a behind-the-scenes engine that fueled the very public face of holy war. Perhaps the most uniquely medieval form of influence was spiritual authority. In a world deeply guided by faith, a woman recognized for her piety or even her visionary experiences held a surprising amount of soft power. A mystic's claim that God favored the Templars' mission could be as persuasive as a king's decree in rallying public support. Women like Iovtar of Bethany as an abbess provided something the warrior monks could not, a direct link to the divine through unceasing prayer. Their convents became spiritual powerhouses, generating the perceived divine favor that legitimized the entire crusading endeavor. They offered care for the soul, tending to wounded knights and weary pilgrims, completing the mission of mercy that the orders themselves were founded upon. Finally, we cannot overlook the power of intellectual and cultural leadership. Women like Marie of Champagne presided over courts that were the cultural epicenters of their time. Through their patronage of poets and writers, they shaped the very ideals of chivalry that defined the knightly class. By glorifying values like honor, piety, and self-sacrifice in popular romances, they crafted the cultural narrative that made young men across Europe aspire to take the cross and join these orders. They were the masterminds behind the propaganda machine, making the Crusades not just a political or military objective, but a romantic and spiritual aspiration that captured the imagination of a continent. This multifaceted influence, political, economic, spiritual, and cultural, meant that the rise of the Crusading Orders was never just a story of men and their swords. It was a complex partnership, one where women provided the essential support system that made those legendary conquests possible. Now, to truly understand the scale of Melisend's impact, we need to step into her world. Imagine Jerusalem in the 1130s and 40s, a fragile Christian kingdom surrounded by powerful Muslim neighbors, its existence perpetually hanging in the balance. Internal politics were just as treacherous, a constant tug of war between powerful barons, ambitious churchmen, and the crown itself. It was into this pressure cooker that Melisend was born, the eldest daughter of King Baldwin II. From a young age, she was not raised to be a passive consort but was groomed as a true heir. Her name included alongside her father's in official charters, a clear signal of her destined role. Her marriage to Fulk of Anjou was meant to bring military strength from Europe, but it also sparked a fierce power struggle. Fulk attempted to sideline her to rule alone, but Melisend and her powerful noble allies pushed back fiercely, forcing the king to acknowledge her as a full partner in governance. This wasn't just a personal victory, it established a crucial precedent for female authority in a land where strength was paramount for survival. Her patronage of the military orders was a masterclass in strategic statecraft, not mere pious donation. The Knights Hospitaller received a truly transformative grant, a complex of buildings right in the heart of Jerusalem, mere steps from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the spiritual center of the entire crusading world. This was prime real estate in every sense of the word. By placing the Hospitallers there, Melisend was doing something brilliant. She was physically embedding this order of caregivers and protectors into the most sacred geography of the city, intertwining their identity with the very reason pilgrims risked their lives to visit. It bolstered their ability to care for the sick and the poor, yes, but it also elevated their prestige immeasurably, making them permanent fixtures in the devotional landscape of the kingdom. For the newer and more militant Knights Templar, her support was equally calculated. They were the shock troops, the standing army desperately needed to patrol the dangerous roads between the coastal cities and Jerusalem. Melisend recognized their indispensable military value early on. Her endorsements and confirmations of their privileges gave them the royal stamp of approval they needed to recruit more knights and secure donations from other nobles. She wasn't just giving them money, she was giving them credibility. In the volatile political arena of the Crusader states, a public alliance with the Queen was a powerful shield against their critics and rivals. Her backing signaled to everyone that the Templars were not a rogue militia but an essential arm of the kingdom's defense, integral to its very survival. Through this dual patronage, Melisend skillfully balanced the two pillars of the crusading ideal, the merciful mission of the Hospitaller and the militant protection of the Templar. She understood that the kingdom needed both the hospital and the garrison to endure, and she used her royal authority to ensure both institutions were not just present but powerfully positioned for success. Her legacy is a powerful testament to the fact that in the precarious world of the Crusades, the most effective power was often wielded not only from the saddle of a warhorse, but from the throne of a queen who knew exactly how to fortify her realm with both stone and sovereignty. Now consider Eleanor of Aquitaine, a figure whose legend often overshadows the nuanced reality of her support for the crusading cause. While Melisend wielded power from a fixed throne in Jerusalem, Eleanor's influence was dynamic, stretching across continents and throughout her long, tumultuous life. As the Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, she controlled one of the wealthiest and most cultured regions of Europe even before her marriages made her Queen of France and later England. This independent wealth gave her a unique platform for action. Her decision to take up the cross and join her first husband, Louis VII of France, on the Second Crusade was unprecedented for a woman of her status. It was a dramatic, bold statement that placed her physically within the world the military orders were fighting to defend. Her journey to the Holy Land was far from a passive pilgrimage. Traveling with a considerable retinue of her own vassals from Aquitaine, Eleanor would have seen the critical work of the Templars and Hospitallers up close. She witnessed their role in safeguarding the dangerous routes, managing the flow of pilgrims, and providing medical care and shelter. This first-hand experience was crucial. It transformed abstract support into tangible understanding. While chroniclers of the time, often biased against her, focused on scandalous rumors and tensions with Louis, it is almost certain that Eleanor used her position during this trip to forge direct connections with the leaders of these orders. She would have understood their logistical needs, their political challenges, and their constant hunger for resources and reinforcements from the West. This knowledge became the foundation for a lifetime of strategic patronage. Upon her return to Europe, first to the French court and later to England after her marriage to Henry II, Eleanor's role evolved from participant to powerful propagandist and financier. Her courts, particularly in Poitiers, became renowned centers of culture, but this was not merely about entertainment. Through the poetry and songs she patronized, the ideals of chivalry were refined and popularized. The romances that flourished under her influence didn't just tell tales of love. They glorified the concepts of honor, duty, and sacred service that were the very bedrock of the military order's identity. By making these values aspirational for the knightly class, she was effectively running a sophisticated recruitment campaign. She made supporting the crusade and its institutions the height of fashionable and pious behavior for any self-respecting noble. Her material support was equally significant. While specific charters in her name may be lost to time, her influence is evident in the actions of those around her. She encouraged her vast network of lords and vassals to donate to the Templars and Hospitallers. She likely advised on the management of their vast landholdings within her own domains in Aquitaine, ensuring these estates remained productive and their revenues reliably funneled toward the east. Even during her 15 years of imprisonment by Henry, her influence persisted through her sons. When Richard the Lionheart took the throne and immediately began organizing the Third Crusade, his deep commitment to the cause and his close alliance with the military orders bore the unmistakable imprint of his mother's teachings and the political environment she had helped cultivate. Eleanor's true power lay in this lasting cultural legacy. She wasn't just a donor, she was a master of narrative who helped weave the story of the Crusading Orders into the very fabric of European aristocratic identity, ensuring their mission resonated for generations long after her own journey to the East had ended. While the spotlight often shines brightest on queens like Melisend, the stability of the Crusader states often relied on the deft, behind-the-scenes work of figures like her sister, Hoderna. As the Countess of Tripoli, Hoderna governed a territory that was absolutely vital yet perpetually vulnerable. Tripoli was a crucial port city, a lifeline for supplies and reinforcements arriving by sea from Europe. But it was also surrounded by potential enemies, both Muslim and Christian, and its land borders were constantly threatened. Hoderna's power did not come from leading armies in the field, but from her mastery of a far more subtle art, the art of diplomacy. In a region where a single misplaced word could spark a war, her court in Tripoli became a neutral ground, a trusted space where tense negotiations could unfold. She hosted emirs from Damascus, ambassadors from the Byzantine Empire, fractious knights from the neighboring principality of Antioch, and of course, representatives from the military orders. For the Templars and Hospitallers, this was invaluable. Their operations depended on safe passage for their supply caravans, intelligence on enemy movements, and treaties that could guarantee temporary truces along volatile frontiers. Hoderna, understanding that the strength of these orders directly contributed to the security of her own county, made their concerns a central part of her diplomatic agenda. She was the quiet facilitator who helped turn potential conflicts into uneasy peace, creating the stable environment the orders needed to recruit, train, and resupply. Her contributions extended far beyond the negotiating table, recognizing that the Hospitallers' mission of care was as important as any military campaign. Hoderna made significant material donations to bolster their work. She granted them productive agricultural lands within her domain. This was not a simple charitable gift, it was a strategic investment. The revenue generated from these estates provided a reliable, local source of income for the order, freeing them from total reliance on unpredictable shipments of silver from Europe. More importantly, the crops grown on these lands, grain, olives, grapes, could be used to feed the sick in their hospitals, supply their garrisons, and even be distributed as aid to poor pilgrims, strengthening the overall resilience of the Christian presence in the Levant. This kind of logistical support was the unglamorous backbone of the crusading endeavor, and Hoderna's foresight in providing it ensured that the Hospitallers could focus their resources on their critical work without the constant specter of starvation or financial collapse. Her story is a powerful reminder that influence is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, the most significant power is the power to create stability, to build connections, and to ensure that the institutions on the front lines have the steady, reliable support they need to survive from one day to the next. While queens and countesses shaped the grand strategy of the Crusades from their thrones, the day-to-day survival of the military orders depended on a vast, often invisible, network of logistical support. This brings us to a fascinating and often overlooked figure, Beatrice of Burburg. Her story pulls back the curtain on the immense economic engine that powered the crusading movement, an engine that frequently relied on the administrative skill of women. Beatrice was not a queen or a warrior. She was a noblewoman from the wealthy and strategically vital region of Flanders, In the mid-12th century, she entered into a formal agreement with the Knights Templar that was far ahead of its time. She became what was essentially a business associate and estate manager for the order, a role that granted her significant responsibility and autonomy. To understand just how unusual this was, we need to picture the Templars' sprawling operation. Donations of land from pious supporters across Europe were pouring in, but these distant estates were useless if they weren't productive. Someone had to manage them, to oversee the planting and harvesting of crops, to collect rents from tenant farmers, to maintain buildings, to negotiate with local merchants, and most importantly, to convert all that agricultural output into a reliable stream of cash and supplies. This revenue was the lifeblood that paid for weapons, armor, horses, and food for the brothers fighting thousands of miles away in the Holy Land. It was a massive, complex undertaking, and the Templars, pragmatic to their core, quickly realized they couldn't manage it all by themselves. They needed trusted, capable local partners who understood the regional economy and could navigate its politics. This is where Beatrice stepped in. For the Templars, her value was immense. As a well-connected noblewoman, she possessed the social standing to command respect from the local populace and the other landowners. She knew the land, the people, and the markets. Her agreement with the order involved taking on the direct management of their properties in her area. This meant she was personally responsible for ensuring these estates turned a profit. She would have kept detailed accounts, settled disputes, organized the sale of surplus grain and wool, and then ensured that the proceeds, whether in silver coin or in kind, were securely transferred to the Templar treasury or shipped east. Her work required a sharp business mind, a firm hand, and impeccable integrity. The fact that the famously strict and secretive Templars entrusted her with this responsibility speaks volumes about her capabilities and their pragmatic approach. They prioritized efficiency and success over rigid adherence to gender norms. If a talented woman could better manage their assets and ensure a steady flow of resources to the front, then they were willing to work with her. For Beatrice, this role was likely a pathway to influence and spiritual fulfillment that was otherwise denied to women in a male-dominated institution. While she could not become a knight brother, she could contribute directly to the holy mission through her administrative prowess. Her work ensured that the knights in the Levant had the means to continue their fight. In a very real sense, her ledgers and account books were just as vital to the crusade as any sword or shield. Through the story of Beatrice of Burburg, we see that the true strength of the Templars lay not only in their famous warriors, but in this extensive web of dedicated managers, both men and women, who turned European farmland into the fuel for a holy war, proving that influence on the home front was absolutely critical to survival on the battlefield. To fully appreciate Iovtar's role, we must first understand the unique spiritual landscape of the Crusader states. This was a world where faith was not a private matter but a public force, a source of political legitimacy and military morale. In such an environment, the endorsement of a respected religious figure wasn't just comforting, it was strategically vital. Iovtar, as the youngest daughter of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and sister to the formidable Queen Melisend, was no ordinary nun. She was princess, a member of the royal family whose very presence in a convent lent it an aura of sacred royalty. Her decision to forego marriage and enter the religious life at the convent of St. Lazarus in Bethany was itself a powerful statement. It signaled a commitment to a higher calling, one that positioned her perfectly to become a spiritual anchor for the entire kingdom. The convent of St. Lazarus in Bethany was strategically significant. Located just under 2 miles from Jerusalem, it was built near the traditional site of the resurrection of Lazarus, making it a major stop for pilgrims on their way to the Holy City. This placed Iovtar and her sisters at the very crossroads of the crusading world. Their daily work involved providing hospitality, medical care, and spiritual solace to weary travelers who had just survived the perilous journey from the coast. In this, they were performing a function that directly complemented the mission of the Knights Hospitaller. While the Hospitallers ran larger hospitals within Jerusalem itself, Iovtar's convent acted as a crucial first point of care and refuge. This partnership was practical and spiritual, creating a seamless network of mercy that stretched from the ports to the holy sites. By overseeing this work, Iovtar wasn't just managing a religious house, she was actively participating in the core charitable mission that justified the entire crusading enterprise in the eyes of many. But her influence extended far beyond the walls of her convent. Iovtar's true power lay in her unique position as a trusted intermediary between the earthly realm of politics and the divine realm of faith. As a royal princess turned abbess, she moved effortlessly between these two worlds. Noble families seeking to gain spiritual merit or perhaps curry favor with the crown would see a donation to the military orders, facilitated by Iovtar, as an especially pious and prestigious act. She became a conduit for patronage, a respected and neutral figure who could vouch for the legitimacy of both the donor and the recipient. When she advocated for the Templars or Hospitallers, it carried a double weight: the authority of her religious office and the implicit backing of the royal family. This was invaluable for the orders, especially when they faced criticism or needed to secure a particularly large bequest of land or money. Perhaps most importantly, Iovtar's life of devout prayer and leadership provided something the warrior monks could not generate on their own: uncontested spiritual legitimacy. In an age that believed deeply in divine intervention, the success of a military campaign was thought to depend on God's favor. The ceaseless prayers of Iovtar and her nuns for the safety of the knights and the success of their missions created a powerful narrative. It framed the often brutal warfare of the Crusades not as mere conquest, but as a sacred struggle blessed by heaven. Her endorsement helped quiet the doubts of those who questioned the idea of monks shedding blood. By publicly aligning her spiritual work with their military goals, she reinforced the idea that the sword could be an instrument of God's will when wielded by the right hands for the right cause. Iovtar of Bethany demonstrates that in the medieval world, a woman's power was not confined to the battlefield or the throne. It could also flow from the quiet, steadfast authority of a life dedicated to faith, making her a hidden architect of the crusading spirit. Now let's turn our attention to a voice that speaks to us not from the halls of power, but from the dusty, perilous roads of pilgrimage. Margaret of Beverly offers us something extraordinarily rare: a ground-level view of the crusading world through the eyes of an ordinary woman. Unlike the queens and noblewomen we've discussed, Margaret was not a patron wielding political or economic influence. She was a pilgrim, driven by faith and a desire to walk in the footsteps of Christ. Her story is not one of granting lands, but of sheer survival, and it is within her harrowing account of the siege of Jerusalem in 1187 that we find one of the most poignant testaments to the everyday, life-saving role of the military orders. Imagine embarking on a journey from the relative safety of England to the distant, war-torn Holy Land. The trip itself was a monumental act of faith, taking months by land and sea, fraught with disease, shipwreck, and the constant threat of attack. Margaret made this journey, and she was in Jerusalem when the forces of Saladin arrived to lay siege to the city. Her narrative, preserved for posterity, plunges us directly into the chaos and terror of that event. She describes a city under relentless assault, its walls shaking under the impact of siege engines, its streets filled with the sounds of battle and the cries of the wounded and frightened. In the midst of this apocalyptic scene, the defenders, a mix of local knights, mercenaries, and the brothers of the Templar and Hospitaller orders, rushed to organize a desperate defense. It is here that Margaret's account becomes invaluable. She writes of how these military orders, even as they prepared for a final, doomed stand, did not forget their core mission, the protection of the faithful. She describes Templars and Hospitallers helping to bolster the city's defenses, certainly, but also directing pilgrims to safer locations, organizing the distribution of what little food and water remained, and providing a semblance of order amidst the panic. For someone like Margaret, these men were not distant, legendary figures. They were a tangible, protective presence. They were the ones standing between her and the enemy, the embodiment of the promise that had drawn her and thousands like her to the Holy Land, the promise that they would be safe in their devotion. Her chronicle confirms that the Order's famous vow to protect pilgrims was not merely a lofty ideal inscribed on a charter. It was a duty they actively fulfilled, even at the hour of their greatest peril. The survival of her story is itself a minor miracle. For a woman of her time and station to leave a written record of her experiences is exceptionally uncommon. Most histories of the Crusades were written by men, often clerics or knights, who focused on grand strategy, heroic deeds, and the actions of kings and sultans. Margaret's perspective is different. She tells us about the weight of a water pot she carried on her head to douse fires started by Greek fire, the exhaustion of helping to shore up damaged battlements, the shared fear and resolve of the common people trapped inside the walls. This is history from the street level, and it gives a human face to the countless anonymous pilgrims whose faith and journeys were the entire raison d'etre for the Crusading Orders' existence. Her testimony, shared orally and eventually written down, served a crucial purpose long after the city had fallen. In the aftermath of the disaster at Jerusalem and the Battle of Hattin, morale in Europe was shattered. There were widespread calls for a new crusade, but also voices of doubt and despair. Accounts like Margaret's played a vital role in shaping the narrative back in the West. They were not just tales of defeat, they were stories of resilience and divine purpose. By speaking of the courage and dedication of the Templars and Hospitallers even in defeat, she helped burnish their tarnished image. She reinforced the idea that their mission was still noble and necessary, that they had fought to the last to protect the innocent. This helped fuel the popular support that would eventually lead to the Third Crusade. Margaret of Beverly's legacy teaches us that influence is not measured only in gold or land grants. Sometimes the most enduring power lies in a simple, truthful story, a first-hand account that preserves the humanity, the sacrifice, and the fragile interdependence between those who fought and those who prayed, reminding us that the crusading movement was ultimately built upon the hopes and experiences of everyday believers. To grasp the monumental impact of Blanche of Castile, we must first appreciate the precarious world she inherited. When her husband, King Louis VIII of France, died unexpectedly in 1226, the crown passed to their 12-year-old son, Louis IX. In an instant, the kingdom teetered on the brink of chaos. The great barons of France, always eager to test a weak monarch, saw a child king as an opportunity to reclaim power and privileges lost to the crown. The very unity of France was at stake. Into this volatile power vacuum stepped Blanche, appointed regent by her husband's will. She was a foreign queen born in Castile, and the nobility initially viewed her with deep suspicion, expecting her to be a mere placeholder they could easily manipulate. They could not have been more mistaken. Blanche of Castile possessed a formidable combination of profound piety and razor-sharp political intelligence. She understood that to secure her son's throne and maintain the authority of the French monarchy, she needed powerful, reliable allies who were loyal not to any individual baron, but to the concept of a strong, unified Christian kingdom. Her gaze turned immediately to the two greatest international institutions within her borders, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. Blanche's support for these orders was a masterstroke of political strategy. She recognized that the Templars and Hospitallers were more than just religious warriors. They were a parallel power structure with vast economic resources, a disciplined military force, and a direct line to the papacy. By firmly aligning the crown with them, she gained access to their formidable network. One of her first acts as regent was to formally confirm all their existing privileges and properties in France. This was not a passive gesture. In the complex feudal world, such confirmations were a powerful political tool. They sent an unmistakable message to the restless nobility. The Queen Regent had the backing of these immensely popular and powerful orders. Any baron considering rebellion would now have to consider that the crown could call upon the military and financial might of the Templars and Hospitallers. Furthermore, these orders, with their sprawling commanderies and preceptories, functioned as a state within a state. They maintained order on their lands, their estates were productive, and their members were loyal to a hierarchy that transcended local disputes. By strengthening them, Blanche was effectively strengthening the economic and social stability of the entire realm, creating pockets of unwavering order loyal directly to the crown she represented. This alliance reached its zenith as her son, Louis, came of age and felt the call to launch a new crusade. The Seventh Crusade was, in many ways, Blanche's creation as much as her son's. She was its chief architect and financier back in France, while Louis led the campaign in Egypt. The logistical challenges were staggering, organizing an army and a navy to transport thousands of men, horses, and supplies across the Mediterranean required expertise that no royal court possessed. Blanche turned to the only organizations with that specific knowledge, the military orders. The Templars and Hospitallers became her indispensable partners. They provided the maps, the navigators familiar with the eastern seas, and the intelligence on conditions in Egypt. Their ports in southern France became the launching points for the invasion fleet. Most crucially, they acted as the kingdom's bankers. The colossal sum of money needed to fund the expedition was safely managed and transferred through the Templars' sophisticated financial system. Blanche negotiated loans from the order, using royal treasures as collateral, effectively turning the Paris Temple into the central bank for the crusade. Her deep trust in their financial integrity and operational skill was absolute. While Louis was away, Blanche's role evolved from regent to protector of the realm. She ruled France with an iron will, constantly shoring up support, suppressing rebellions, and most importantly, ensuring a steady flow of reinforcements and funds to her son's army in the east. This relentless logistical support was only possible because of the streamlined channel she had established with the military orders. They were the conduit through which French resources reached the crusading front. Blanche of Castile's legacy demonstrates the pinnacle of a regent queen's influence. She wielded the crusading orders not merely as instruments of faith, but as essential pillars of statecraft, using their unique capabilities to defend her son's kingdom at home and project its power across the seas, truly becoming the protector of both France and its sacred ambitions. Isabella of Angulem's relationship with the crusading orders presents a fascinating study in the volatile and often contradictory nature of medieval power dynamics. Unlike the steadfast patronage of a Blanche of Castile, Isabella's story is one of shifting allegiances, where support and self-interest were frequently intertwined. Her life was a dramatic saga of ascent, fall, and reinvention, and her dealings with the Knights Templar reflected this tumultuous journey. Crowned Queen of England as a young woman after her marriage to King John, Isabella found herself at the center of one of Europe's most powerful courts. Yet, following John's death and the ascension of her young son, Henry III, her position became increasingly precarious. As a Queen Dowager, her influence in England waned, a reality she found deeply frustrating. This sense of displacement would ultimately shape her controversial legacy. It was during this period of transition, as she sought to re-establish her power base, that Isabella initially became a significant benefactor to the Templars. Returning to her native lands in Aquitaine, she held considerable estates as the Countess of La Marche following her remarriage to Hugh de Lusignan. From this position of renewed authority, she made substantial donations of land to the order. These were not trivial gifts. They were strategic holdings that bolstered the Templars' network of commanderies across southwestern France. For Isabella, this patronage served multiple purposes. It was a very public act of piety, burnishing her credentials as a devout noblewoman in good standing with the Church. More pragmatically, it was a shrewd political investment. Aligning herself with the powerful and respected Templars granted her a measure of their prestige and created a relationship with an institution that commanded both military might and significant financial resources. She was, in effect, building a powerful ally on her doorstep. However, the very pragmatism that drove her initial support would later lead to a stunning rupture. Isabella's ambitions in Aquitaine eventually brought her into direct conflict with the English crown, the same crown her son now ruled. She and her husband, Hugh, became central figures in a rebellion of French barons against Henry III, a conflict that placed her in a desperate need for funds to wage war. It is here that the historical record becomes particularly charged. The Templars, with their renowned wealth and secure strongholds, became a target. Isabella was accused of seizing Templar property and appropriating their resources to finance her rebellion. The specifics are shrouded in the partisan accusations of a civil war, but the mere fact of the allegation is telling. It reveals a relationship that had soured completely, transforming from one of mutual benefit to one of outright exploitation. This dramatic shift underscores a critical, often overlooked aspect of the Order's existence: their vulnerability. For all their power and papal protection, they were not immune to the predations of local nobility. A patron like Isabella, who knew the extent of their wealth and the location of their preceptories, could quickly become a threat when her own interests diverged from theirs. The same woman who had once strengthened their presence in Aquitaine was now allegedly plundering it, highlighting the precarious balance the Orders had to maintain with every powerful ally. Their wealth made them a target, and their cross-border loyalties could make them seem like a foreign entity to be used in a local squabble. Yet, to define Isabella solely by this conflict would be to ignore the full picture. Despite the later accusations, her earlier, substantive contributions to the Templars' infrastructure in Aquitaine remained. The lands she donated were not returned. The commanderies built there continued to function, generating revenue and supporting the Order's broader mission for decades. Her story, in all its complexity, is a vital reminder that the history of the Crusading Orders was not a simple narrative of unwavering support from saintly figures. It was a messy, human business of alliances forged and broken, of generosity and greed often existing within the same person. Isabella of Angulem embodies this ambiguity perfectly, a queen who both built up and tore down, proving that even the most controversial patrons played an indispensable, if complicated, role in the Order's enduring saga. While the queens and regents provided the political and financial muscle for the Crusading Orders, the battle for the hearts and minds of Europe was waged in a different arena altogether: the vibrant cultural courts of the aristocracy. And no one mastered this subtle art of persuasion better than Marie of Champagne. As the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Louis VII, Marie inherited a unique legacy. the political ambition of the French crown, and the unparalleled cultural sophistication of the Aquitanian court. She brought these forces together in her own domain, presiding over the court of Champagne in Troyes, which quickly became the intellectual and artistic epicenter of 12th century France. Her influence did not manifest in signed charters or land grants, but in something far more pervasive and enduring. She shaped the very stories a generation told itself about honor, love, and war. Under Marie's discerning patronage, a literary revolution took place. She supported writers like Regent de Troyes, who is often credited with creating the Arthurian romances as we know them. In works like Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, and Percival, the Story of the Grail, Regent crafted a new ideal of knighthood. His heroes were not merely brutal warriors, they were paragons of a refined code of chivalry. They were courageous in battle, yes, but also devoutly pious, fiercely loyal to their lords, and committed to protecting the weak and the innocent. This was a powerful rebranding of the martial class, and it echoed the core values that the Knights Templar and Hospitallers claimed to embody. When a young nobleman read about Lancelot's quest or Percival's search for the Holy Grail, he wasn't just being entertained, he was being presented with a template for a life of sacred purpose. These stories made the idea of taking the cross, of joining a holy order dedicated to such ideals, seem like the ultimate fulfillment of a knight's destiny. Marie's court was, in effect, running the most sophisticated recruitment campaign imaginable, one that operated on the level of aspiration and emotion rather than raw obligation. Marie's role extended beyond that of a mere muse. She was an active director of this cultural project. Historical accounts suggest she provided Regent with the themes and even the specific storylines for his romances. She didn't just fund art, she curated a message. This message celebrated the very concepts that justified the existence of the military orders, the fusion of piety and violence, the notion that a knight could achieve spiritual salvation through martial prowess when directed toward a holy cause. By making these values the height of cultural fashion, she created an environment where supporting the Crusades and, by extension, the orders that led them was the natural, celebrated choice for any self-respecting noble. Her influence also had a direct practical channel. Marie maintained a wide correspondence with key figures in the Levant, including her half-brother, Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem. Through these letters, she stayed acutely informed of the dire needs and constant struggles of the Crusader states. This knowledge allowed her to act as a crucial link, a trusted voice who could relay accurate information from the front lines back to the courts of Europe. She likely used her immense social capital to quietly facilitate donations from other nobles, encouraging them to send their wealth and their sons to support the cause she so elegantly championed in her stories. While we may not have a single charter bearing her name that granted a specific parcel of land to the Templars, her impact was arguably more profound. She granted them something even more valuable: cultural legitimacy and a steady stream of inspired recruits who arrived in the Holy Land not just as soldiers, but as believers in a romantic ideal she had helped to write. Through the power of narrative, Marie of Champagne didn't just support the Crusading Orders, she helped define their very soul for centuries to come. Now consider the precarious existence of a frontier lord in the Crusader states, where a single poor harvest or a broken treaty could mean the loss of everything. This was the world of Helvis of Ramla, a noblewoman whose life was a masterclass in navigating relentless danger through shrewd strategy and steadfast alliances. Unlike queens who ruled from relative security in Jerusalem, Helvis operated on the front lines. Her first title, Lady of Ramla, placed her in charge of a lordship that was both critically important and terrifyingly vulnerable. Ramla was located in the central plains of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a region of fertile farmland that served as the breadbasket for the entire realm. But its open terrain made it notoriously difficult to defend from the fast-moving cavalry raids of neighboring Muslim powers. Holding onto Ramla was not about glory, it was about survival, and it required a leader who understood that strength lay not only in walls and weapons, but in clever diplomacy and reliable partners. Helvis recognized early on that the two most reliable partners in this unstable landscape were the military orders. Her support for the Knights Templar and Hospitallers was a calculated investment in her own security and that of her people. She granted them parcels of her valuable land, but these were not random acts of piety. Each donation was a strategic decision. By giving the orders a foothold within her territory, she was effectively outsourcing a portion of her defense. A Templar commandery, even a small one, meant a garrison of trained, disciplined knights who could respond rapidly to threats. It meant a fortified structure that could serve as a refuge for the local population during an attack. For the Hospitallers, her grants often supported their medical mission, ensuring that there was a place to care for the wounded, which in turn maintained the health and morale of the entire region's defenders. In this way, Helvis was building a collaborative defense network, weaving the military orders directly into the fabric of her lordship's security apparatus. She wasn't just giving away land, she was purchasing an insurance policy paid for in acreage and guaranteed by the most formidable warriors in the Levant. Her political acumen truly came to the fore following her marriage to Raymond Roman III, Count of Tripoli, which made her the co-ruler of another crucial crusader state. Tripoli was a coastal powerhouse, a vital port for reinforcements and supplies arriving from Europe, but it was also surrounded by potential enemies and perpetually caught in the crossfire of larger conflicts between Jerusalem, Antioch, and the rising power of Saladin. In this role, Helvis's influence shifted from the local to the regional. The court at Tripoli became a center for delicate negotiations, and Helvis proved to be an indispensable mediator. The Crusader states were famously fractious, with rivalries between noble families often threatening to erupt into open conflict, a luxury they could ill afford with a unified Muslim enemy gathering strength. Helvis used her position and her deep understanding of the various personalities involved to smooth over these disputes. She would host feasts, facilitate private discussions, and help forge compromises that kept the Christian factions from turning on each other. This work of peacemaking was perhaps her greatest contribution to the military orders. Internal Christian conflict was a greater threat to their mission than any external foe. A feud between two barons could disrupt supply lines, divert military resources, and leave entire sectors of the frontier undefended. By acting as a neutral arbiter and a voice for unity, Helvis ensured that the Templars and Hospitallers could focus their entire energy on the external threat. She created the political stability they needed to operate effectively. Her life demonstrates that the most crucial battles in the Crusader states were not always fought with swords on an open field. Often, they were won across a negotiating table through the quiet, persistent work of a leader who understood that the strongest castle is only as secure as the alliances that surround it. Helvis of Ramla wielded a different kind of power, the power of connection, the power of diplomacy, and the power to ensure that the defenders of the realm were looking outward at their common enemy, not inward at each other. While the military orders were forging their identity in the harsh landscape of the Holy Land, a parallel revolution in religious life was taking place back in Europe, one that would create a powerful spiritual ally for their cause. At the heart of this movement was Petronilla of Camillé and the extraordinary institution she led, the Abbey of Fontevraud. To understand her unique role, we must first appreciate how radical Fontevraud was for its time. Founded by the charismatic preacher Robert of Arbrisel around 1100, this was no ordinary convent. It was a double monastery, a community where both monks and nuns lived under one rule, and remarkably, that rule was administered by an abbess. This was a stunning inversion of the typical medieval hierarchy, placing a woman in ultimate spiritual and administrative authority over men. When Petronilla was chosen as the first abbess after Robert's death, she wasn't just taking over a religious house, she was becoming the steward of a daring social experiment that championed the spiritual power of women. Under Petronilla's shrewd and energetic leadership, Fontevraud blossomed into one of the most influential religious centers in all of Europe. Its reputation was built on a profound commitment to charity and care for the needy, a mission that resonated deeply with the emerging ethos of the Knights Hospitaller. While the Hospitallers in Jerusalem tended to the physical wounds of pilgrims and warriors, the nuns and monks of Fontevraud cared for the sick, the poor, and the outcast in the heart of France. This created a natural spiritual kinship. Petronilla recognized that though their methods differed, one order worked in a hospital near the Holy Sepulchre, the other in a tranquil abbey in the Anjou countryside. They were partners in the same divine work of mercy. This wasn't a formal alliance signed on a treaty. It was a meeting of minds and missions across vast distances. Petronilla's most significant contribution to the crusading movement was her transformation of Fontevraud into a powerhouse of prayer and support. In an age that believed fervently in the tangible power of intercession, the prayers of holy women were considered especially potent. Petronilla organized her community into a perpetual spiritual engine for the crusade. Her nuns devoted hours each day to praying for the safety of knights in the field, for the success of Christian armies, and for the souls of those who fell in battle. This provided a crucial service to the military orders. A Templar knight facing a desperate charge might draw courage from the belief that hundreds of devoted women across the sea were lifting him up in prayer at that very moment. This spiritual support system helped legitimize the often brutal warfare of the Crusades, framing it not as mere conquest but as a sacred endeavor blessed by the constant prayers of the faithful. But her support extended far beyond the spiritual. Fontevraud, under her management, became incredibly wealthy, attracting donations from noble families across Europe. Petronilla used this influence to actively encourage these patrons to also support the Hospitallers. When a lord or lady came to the abbey seeking spiritual advice or wishing to make a donation to ensure their place in heaven, Petronilla would have been in a perfect position to guide their generosity. She could suggest splitting a bequest between Fontevraud and the Hospitallers, or even directing it entirely to the military orders' work in the East. As a trusted religious figure with no obvious selfish motive, her endorsement would have carried immense weight. She acted as a silent fundraiser and a powerful advocate, channeling the wealth and piety of European nobility toward the practical needs of the crusading front. Furthermore, Fontevraud's abbey became a sanctuary for the human collateral of the Crusades. Returning knights weary, wounded, or traumatized by their experiences found solace and care within its walls. Women who had accompanied their husbands on campaign and been widowed found a new home and purpose there. Eleanor of Aquitaine herself, a towering figure we've already discussed, would later choose Fontevraud as her final resting place, a testament to its prestige. By tending to these shattered lives, Petronilla and her nuns were healing the human cost of holy war, offering a place of peace that perfectly complemented the Hospitallers' field hospitals. Petronilla of Camillé exemplifies a different kind of female influence, one that operated from the cloister rather than the throne room. She wielded not a sword or a scepter, but the powerful tools of prayer, persuasion, and compassionate care, creating a symbiotic bond between her peaceful abbey and the distant military orders that proved just as vital to the survival of the crusading ideal as any shipment of swords or silver. To truly grasp the monumental challenge Sibylla of Jerusalem faced, we must first transport ourselves to the searing heat of July 1187 to a place called the Horns of Hattin. Here, the combined armies of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, including the vast majority of the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, were encircled and annihilated by the forces of Saladin. The defeat was not just a military loss, it was an apocalypse. The legendary True Cross, the spiritual heart of the kingdom, was captured. The king, Guy of Lusignan, was taken prisoner. And most devastatingly, the core of the professional warrior class, the very men who formed the backbone of the kingdom's defense, was wiped out. The Templars and Hospitallers who were not slaughtered on the field were executed afterwards by Saladin, who saw their fanatical devotion as an intolerable threat. In a single sun-scorched day, the Kingdom of Jerusalem effectively ceased to exist as a military power. It was onto this stage of absolute devastation that Sibylla stepped. Crowned queen just a year earlier after a bitter succession dispute, she was now the ruler of a realm that was collapsing in real time. With her husband imprisoned, she was the sole remaining symbol of authority in a capital city, Jerusalem, that was filling with terrified refugees and bracing for an imminent siege. Her treasury was empty, her army was gone, and the walls of her cities were manned by a desperate patchwork of merchants, pilgrims, and whatever few knights had miraculously survived the catastrophe. In this atmosphere of utter despair, many would have capitulated or fled, but Sibylla did not. Her first and most crucial act was to provide a focal point for resistance, to become the still center around which the shattered remnants of her kingdom could coalesce. And in this endeavor, her most critical partners were the crippled but not yet destroyed military orders. Though their field forces had been annihilated, the Templars and Hospitallers still possessed a skeletal structure. They had commanderies and castles that had not yet fallen. They had a flow of resources, however diminished, from Europe, and most importantly, they had a core of surviving sergeants, priests, and administrators who were utterly dedicated to their mission. Sibylla understood that these fractured institutions represented her last best hope. One of her first acts was to formally confirm all their existing privileges and holdings. In a time of chaos, this was far more than a symbolic gesture. It was a vital act of stabilization. By reaffirming their legal rights to properties and incomes, she was giving these orders the legal footing they needed to begin the agonizing process of rebuilding. It was a signal to their remaining members and to their supporters in Europe that the crown still stood with them, that their mission, though battered, was not abandoned. Her support became intensely practical in the defense of Jerusalem itself. As Saladin's army closed in, the city's defense was led by an unlikely trio: Balian of Ibelin, a baron who had escaped Hattin, and the handful of surviving Templar and Hospitaller officials who had been left behind to manage the order's affairs in the city. Sibylla, from within the besieged citadel, empowered these men. She authorized them to knight every able-bodied man of noble birth, and even wealthy commoners, to create a new officer class on the spot. She supported their desperate decision to melt down the silver ornaments from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to pay for food and supplies. Most importantly, she provided the political authority that legitimized their actions. When the city's defenders negotiated its eventual surrender to Saladin, it was Sibylla's royal authority that gave their terms weight, ensuring safe passage for the surviving civilians and the few remaining knights. In the aftermath, as she joined her husband in captivity and was eventually released to rule the rump state of the Kingdom of Jerusalem from the city of Acre, her work continued. She spent her final months before succumbing to an epidemic in 1190, trying to reassemble the fragments of her realm. She worked to secure the coastal cities that had not yet fallen, the very ports that would become the new beachheads for the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart and Philip Augustus. In these fragile holdings, the military orders began their slow and painful resurrection, and they did so under the nominal authority of a queen who had never stopped fighting for their survival. Sibylla's reign is a profound lesson in leadership defined not by glorious victory, but by dignified perseverance in the face of unimaginable loss. She became the lifeline for the Crusading Orders at the precise moment when their flame was closest to being extinguished, proving that a ruler's true mettle is often revealed not in the height of their power, but in the depth of their crisis. While the battlefield strategies of the Crusades were drawn on maps, some of the most effective campaigns were waged in the quiet corridors of royal courts and through the intimate bonds of family. To understand this form of influence, we must turn our attention to Beatrice of Savoy, a woman who mastered the art of power not through direct command, but through an unparalleled dynastic network. Imagine a spider at the center of a web that stretched across 13th century Europe. Beatrice, as the Countess of Provence, was that central figure. Her true power, however, did not stem from her own title, but from her astonishing success as a mother. She raised 4 daughters and skillfully arranged their marriages, placing each one on a major European throne. Marguerite became Queen of France, Eleanor Queen of England, Sanchia Queen of Germany, and Beatrice Queen of Sicily. In an era where family was the primary engine of international politics, this made Beatrice of Savoy the matriarch of a continental empire. She was the common link between the most powerful courts of the age, a position she leveraged with remarkable skill to advance causes she believed in, chief among them the support of the Crusading Orders. Her method of influence was subtle, personal, and profoundly effective. Unlike a queen who could issue a royal charter, Beatrice's power was exercised through letters, family visits, and the gentle but persistent guidance of her daughters. When she spoke of the needs of the Templars or Hospitallers, she wasn't just another noble petitioner. She was a mother advising her children, the queens. She could explain to Marguerite in Paris or Eleanor in London how confirming a privilege for the Hospitallers in their realm would not only be a pious act, but would also strengthen their own royal authority by aligning them with a popular and powerful international institution. She could facilitate introductions, ensuring that a Templar envoy from the East was granted a respectful audience rather than being lost in the chaotic shuffle of court life. Her daughters, in turn, trusted her counsel. They knew their mother had a keen understanding of European politics and their own best interests, and they often acted on her recommendations, which frequently included support for the military orders. This network allowed Beatrice to act as a behind-the-scenes diplomat and problem solver for the orders. A dispute between the Templars and a local bishop in England, for instance, could be quietly mentioned by Beatrice to Queen Eleanor, who might then suggest a compromise to her husband, Henry III. A request from the Hospitallers for access to a port in Sicily could be smoothly facilitated through a word from Beatrice to her daughter, the Sicilian Queen Beatrice. She became a clearinghouse for information and a lubricant for transactions that might otherwise have been stalled by bureaucracy or suspicion. Her influence ensured that the Order's international operations ran more smoothly, that their petitions were heard at the highest levels, and that their legal status was protected across multiple kingdoms. This was a form of support that no single monarch could provide, as it operated simultaneously across national borders, creating a cohesive web of favor and protection. Perhaps her most significant contribution was in the realm of public relations and fundraising. Beatrice used her extensive travels between her daughters' courts to act as a living conduit for crusading propaganda. She could share first-hand accounts gleaned from knights and pilgrims of the Order's bravery and their desperate needs in the East. Her impeccable credibility as the mother of 4 queens lent these stories immense weight. When she encouraged the nobles of Provence, France, or England to donate to the Templar cause, it carried the implicit endorsement of the royal families of Europe. She helped organize and promote fundraising efforts, turning the support of the military orders into a fashionable and prestigious cause among the aristocracy. In this way, Beatrice of Savoy became one of the greatest unsung fundraisers for the crusading movement, her familial connections providing a platform that amplified the Order's message and filled their coffers. Her story is a masterclass in soft power, demonstrating that the most formidable fortress was sometimes not made of stone, but of bloodlines and carefully nurtured relationships, proving that a mother's influence could indeed shape the fate of empires. Now let's shift our focus to a city under constant threat, and the remarkable woman who stood as its unwavering guardian. Imagine the bustling port of Beirut in the early 13th century, a vital lifeline for the struggling Crusader states, its harbor filled with ships bringing precious reinforcements and supplies from Europe, yet its landward walls perpetually shadowed by the looming threat of Ayyubid armies. This was the world of Juliana of Grenier, a noblewoman who inherited not just a title but a city on the front line. As the Lady of Beirut, she was thrust into a role that demanded far more than ceremonial leadership. It required the strategic mind of a general, the resolve of a seasoned commander, and the unshakable courage to face down siege and storm. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that when survival hung in the balance, the defense of a kingdom could fall squarely on the shoulders of a woman, and her most critical alliance would be forged not in a royal court, but on the fortified ramparts of her city alongside the Knights Templar. Juliana's partnership with the Templars was born from sheer necessity and mutual strategic interest. Beirut was priceless. Its loss would have severed a critical maritime artery, isolating the remaining Crusader strongholds further south. The Templars, with their extensive resources and elite, disciplined fighting force, understood this better than anyone. They needed Beirut secure to ensure their own operatives and supplies could move freely along the coast. For Juliana, the Templars represented something equally vital. A professional standing army she could call upon instantly, a force whose loyalty was to the defense of the Christian presence itself, not subject to the whims or rivalries of local barons. This was not a distant, formal agreement. It was a hands-on, operational collaboration. Juliana would have provided the Templars with a permanent base within the city walls, perhaps even granting them control over a key section of the defenses. In return, they embedded their knights and sergeants into the city's garrison, creating a hardened core around which the militia and civilian defenders could rally. She supplied them with food, arms, and funds from her own treasury and the city's revenues, ensuring the Templar contingent in Beirut was always battle-ready. This symbiotic relationship turned the city into a formidable bastion, a fusion of local leadership and international military expertise. Her role, however, extended far beyond writing checks and signing supply orders. When the alarm bells rang and enemy forces appeared on the horizon, Juliana was present on the walls. She oversaw the final preparations, checking the stockpiles of arrows, pitch, and stone. She moved among the defenders, a visible symbol of resistance whose calm authority could steady the nerves of a terrified citizenry. Historical accounts suggest she was directly involved in strategic councils, where the Templar marshal or commander would have discussed deployment, weak points in the defenses, and counter-siege tactics. Her intimate knowledge of the city's layout, its people, and the surrounding terrain would have made her counsel invaluable. She wasn't just a patron, she was a partner in command. This active, martial leadership defied the conventional gender norms of her time, but in the brutal reality of the Crusader states, practicality always triumphed over prejudice. The people of Beirut weren't looking for a figurehead, they were looking for a leader who could keep them alive, and Juliana proved herself to be exactly that. The true test of this alliance likely came during the devastating raid on Beirut by the forces of the Ayyubid Sultan al-Adil in 1207. While the city did not fall, the attack caused significant damage and loss of life, a stark reminder of its perpetual vulnerability. In the aftermath, Juliana's work would have begun anew, focused on rebuilding and strengthening what had been broken. Here, her collaboration with the Templars would have shifted from active defense to military engineering. Together, they would have assessed the damage, identifying which sections of the wall needed to be thickened, which towers required reinforcement, and where new killing zones could be established. The Templars, with their extensive experience in castle design and siege warfare across the Holy Land, provided the technical knowledge, while Juliana provided the labor, materials, and logistical coordination to turn those plans into stronger, higher, more formidable stone barriers. This cycle of attack and repair, of shared hardship and determination, forged a bond between the Lady of Beirut and her Templar allies that was as strong as the walls they defended. Juliana of Grenier embodies a unique and essential archetype, the woman as defender, the local ruler whose survival and that of her people was inextricably linked to a deep, operational partnership with the military orders, proving that the defense of the crusading ideal was always a collaborative effort between global institutions and local courage. While the Crusader states on the mainland faced relentless pressure, the island of Cyprus emerged as a vital sanctuary, a strategic rear base where the faltering crusading effort could catch its breath and regroup. And it was here, in the complex political landscape of the early 13th century, that Alice of Champagne stepped into a role that would prove indispensable. As the daughter of Queen Isabella I of Jerusalem and Henry of Champagne, Alice carried the legacy of Crusader royalty in her blood. Her claim to power came not through a husband, but through her son, Henry I of Cyprus, whose minority thrust her into the position of regent. This was no mere caretaker role. Cyprus was more than just an island. It was the last major secure territory in the eastern Mediterranean, still firmly in Christian hands after the disastrous losses in the Holy Land. Its ports were the essential gateways for men, money, and material arriving from Europe. Its farmlands could feed armies. Controlling Cyprus meant controlling the lifeline of the entire crusading movement, and Alice understood that this control depended on a delicate balance of internal stability and unwavering support for the institutions that could project power back to the mainland, namely, the Knights Templar and Hospitaller. Alice's first and most crucial act as regent was one of profound strategic reassurance. She moved quickly to formally confirm all the land holdings, privileges, and legal rights of the military orders on the island. This was far more than a bureaucratic formality. In the uncertain atmosphere following a succession, powerful institutions like the Templars and Hospitallers needed to know that their investments were secure, that their commanderies would not be subject to seizure by greedy local barons or contested by the crown itself. By issuing these confirmations, Alice was sending a clear message. The government of Cyprus was a steadfast ally. She was guaranteeing them a permanent, secure foothold, a place where they could store supplies, train new recruits, and plan campaigns without the immediate threat of invasion that hung over every stronghold on the Levantine coast. This stability was something the orders could find nowhere else, and it made Cyprus the indispensable logistical heart of their entire operation. A Templar knight recovering from wounds or a Hospitaller treasurer managing the flow of funds from Europe could now operate with confidence, knowing the Regent herself was their protector. Yet her greatest challenge lay not in managing the orders themselves, but in managing the tensions that swirled around them. The presence of the military orders on Cyprus was a double-edged sword. While they brought military strength and economic activity, they were also a state within a state, owing their primary allegiance to the Pope, not the local crown. Their extensive land holdings and special legal status often provoked resentment among the local Frankish barons, who saw them as arrogant, privileged, and a threat to their own power and influence. These barons were a prickly and independent-minded bunch, fiercely protective of their rights and quick to take offense. A dispute over land boundaries, a conflict over judicial authority, or simply a clash of egos between a Templar preceptor and a local lord could easily escalate, threatening to fracture the island's fragile unity from within. This is where Alice's true genius as a negotiator shone. She positioned herself not as a dictator issuing commands, but as the essential mediator, the neutral ground where these competing powers could air their grievances and find a compromise. Her court became a theater of diplomacy. She would have listened patiently to the complaints of a baron furious about Templar knights exercising their right to graze livestock on land he considered his own. Then she would have heard the Templar commander's defense, rooted in papal bulls and royal charters. Her role was to find a middle path, one that acknowledged the baron's concerns to preserve his dignity and loyalty, while also upholding the legally protected rights of the order. She understood that forcing a resolution would only breed deeper resentment, but by facilitating a negotiated settlement, she could turn rivals into reluctant partners. This relentless, behind-the-scenes work of conflict prevention was arguably her most significant contribution. By stopping these squabbles before they could erupt into open conflict, she ensured that the military orders and the Cypriot nobility were looking outward toward the common enemy across the sea, rather than inward at each other. She maintained the cohesion that was absolutely vital for the island's survival, and by extension for any hope of recovering lost ground in the Holy Land. Alice of Champagne's regency provides a masterful example of a different kind of power, the power of the facilitator, the ruler who strengthens her realm not by leading charges, but by mastering the subtle arts of diplomacy and administration, creating the stable and supportive environment where the defenders of Christendom could not only survive, but prepare to fight another day. To understand the complex and often controversial influence of Agnes of Courtenay, we must first step into the fraught and feverish atmosphere of the court of Jerusalem in the late 12th century. This was a kingdom living on a knife's edge, its existence perpetually threatened by the rising power of Saladin, who sought to unite the Muslim world and drive the Christians into the sea. And at the heart of this gathering storm was a young king afflicted with a terrible and visible disease, Baldwin IV, the leper king. His tragic condition made him a symbol of Christian resilience, but it also created a power vacuum, a space where competing factions within his court jockeyed for control over the dying king and the fate of the realm. Into this volatile political arena stepped his mother, Agnes, a woman whose past made her a figure of intense suspicion among the noble families, but whose fierce love for her son and his kingdom gave her a unique and potent form of authority. Agnes's path to power was anything but straightforward. Her own marital history was a subject of gossip and scorn among the aristocratic elite. She had been married and divorced from the future King Amalric, Baldwin's father, under pressure from the High Court, which objected to her relatively lowly noble status and the close blood ties between them. This early rejection by the very barons she would later have to deal with colored every interaction she had. They saw her as an upstart, an outsider who had been officially removed from the royal line, only to return through her son. But what the nobility viewed as a liability, Agnes transformed into a strength, because she was not bound by the same web of alliances and rivalries that entangled the great lords of the realm. She could operate with a different kind of freedom. Her sole political interest was the preservation of her son's rule and the security of his inheritance. This singular focus allowed her to see the strategic landscape with a clarity that often eluded the barons, who were frequently more concerned with their own regional power bases and personal prestige. It was from this perspective that Agnes developed a clear-eyed appreciation for the Knights Templar and Hospitaller. Unlike the feudal levies provided by the nobility, which could be unreliable and were often recalled to defend local castles, the military orders offered a constant, professional standing army. Their knights took vows of obedience, meaning they followed the strategic directives of their Grand Master without question. They were garrisoned in key fortresses across the kingdom, and their financial networks stretched back to Europe, providing a steady, independent source of funding for the war effort. Agnes recognized that these institutions were not competitors to royal authority, as some barons feared, but were in fact its most reliable instruments. They were the one military force whose loyalty was to the defense of the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself, not to the shifting ambitions of a particular duke or count. She understood that in the face of Saladin's immense armies, the kingdom needed this disciplined, unwavering core of defenders. Her influence, therefore, was exercised in the council chambers and in the private conversations with her ailing son. When critical decisions were made about campaign strategy, the allocation of royal funds, or the appointment of military commanders, Agnes was a voice arguing for the integration of the Templar and Hospitaller leadership into the highest echelons of command. She likely advocated for them to be given responsibility for key sectors of defense, recognizing that their castles were often the best maintained and most stubbornly defended. She would have supported the flow of royal resources to these orders, understanding that an investment in the Templars was an investment in the kingdom's survival. Furthermore, she acted as a crucial political shield for them. When the order's actions, perhaps a rash attack or a refusal to comply with a baron's request, angered the nobility, Agnes could use her position to diffuse the tension, to explain the strategic necessity behind their decisions, and to prevent these disputes from fracturing the Christian front at a time when unity was absolutely paramount. Her behind-the-scenes maneuvering ensured that the military orders had a powerful advocate at the very heart of power, someone who could translate their battlefield needs into political reality, securing them the men, money, and royal favor they needed to stand against the coming storm. Now picture a fortress carved into the very cliffs of the desert, a solitary sentinel guarding the ragged eastern frontier of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This was Kerak Castle, and the vast, sun-scorched lordship it commanded was known as Ultra-Jordan, the land beyond the Jordan River. It was a place of stark beauty and extreme peril, a buffer zone between the fertile heartlands of the kingdom and the vast deserts from which its enemies emerged. To rule here required a leader of exceptional fortitude, a person as resilient as the stone of their own fortress. That leader was Stephanie of Milly, a woman whose very survival, and the survival of the realm, depended on her ability to forge an unbreakable bond with the most formidable fighting force of her age, the Knights Templar. Stephanie's power was rooted in the uncompromising reality of geography. Her domain, Ultra-Jordan, was not just a territory, it was the kingdom's early warning system and its first line of defense. The vital caravan routes from Syria and Egypt snaked through her lands, making control of them a matter of immense economic and strategic importance. Any army marching from Damascus toward Jerusalem had to pass under the watchful eyes of her garrisons. Kerak Castle, with its massive walls and seemingly impregnable position, was the linchpin of this entire defensive scheme. But a castle, no matter how strong, is only as powerful as the garrison that mans its walls and the resources that fill its storerooms. This is where Stephanie's genius for alliance building came to the fore. She recognized that the local feudal levies, while loyal, were no match for the professional, fanatically disciplined brotherhood of the Knights Templar. Her most crucial decision was to invite the order into the very heart of her defense network, transforming a simple lord-vassal relationship into a deep operational partnership. Her support for the Templars was both generous and brilliantly pragmatic. She donated key parcels of land and valuable rights to the order, but these were far from simple acts of charity. Each grant was a strategic investment. By giving the Templars a tangible stake in the security and prosperity of Ultra-Jourdain, she ensured their permanent and vested interest in its survival. A Templar commandery established on her lands meant a permanent garrison of their elite knights. It meant that the order would pour its own considerable resources into strengthening the local fortifications they now co-owned. Most importantly, it integrated the Templars directly into her chain of command. In times of threat, she wasn't sending a plea for help to a distant chapter house. She was conferring with the Templar commander who lived just down the road, their fates and fortunes already intertwined. This fusion of local authority and international military power turned Ultra-Jourdain into a hardened shield for the entire kingdom. The true test of this alliance came not in times of peace, but during the terrifying thunder of siege. Stephanie's leadership was forged in these moments of extreme crisis, most famously during the multiple sieges of Kerak Castle by the forces of Saladin. Historical accounts describe her not as a passive observer huddled in the deepest cellar, but as an active and visible commander during the defense. While the Templar knights directed the counterfire from their mangonels and repelled assaults on the walls, Stephanie managed the critical logistics inside the castle. She would have been overseeing the distribution of food and water to ensure supplies lasted, organizing teams to care for the wounded, and rallying the morale of the civilian population trapped within the walls. Her presence was a powerful symbol of defiance. When Saladin's armies laid their traps and his siege engines battered the stonework, they were not just attacking a fortress, they were attacking the home of a woman who refused to yield, a resolve mirrored by her Templar allies who fought with the grim determination of men defending their own. Her role extended beyond the battlefield to the delicate art of negotiation. There's a famous, perhaps legendary, account that during one siege, Saladin, aware that Stephanie's young son was within the castle, offered to spare the boy's tower from his bombardment. Stephanie's reported response was a masterpiece of defiant diplomacy. She supposedly replied that her son would not know the meaning of fear if he did not see it in his own mother, and that she would not accept special terms while her people suffered. Whether entirely true or not, the story captures the essence of her leadership, a fearless commitment to shared sacrifice that would have earned her the unwavering respect of the Templars fighting beside her. They knew they were not serving a distant landlord but a partner who shared every ounce of their risk. Stephanie of Milly embodies the ultimate frontier ruler, a woman who understood that in the most vulnerable places, power is not about holding a title, but about building a brotherhood of survival, proving that the strongest alliances are those forged not in halls of power, but on the ramparts of a besieged castle under a hail of enemy fire. Imagine the sheer weight of a crown placed upon your head not in a moment of triumph, but in the devastating aftermath of a kingdom's near-total collapse. This was the stark reality for Isabella I of Jerusalem, a queen whose reign began not with celebration, but with the monumental task of picking up the pieces. The era of the legendary leper king, Baldwin IV, and the catastrophic defeat at Hattin were recent, searing memories. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, once boasting a formidable coastline and a powerful army, had been reduced to a sliver of its former self, clinging desperately to a few fortified port cities like Tyre and Acre. The military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, were shadows of their former glory, their ranks decimated, their grand masters slain on the field at Hattin, and their network of castles either captured or under constant threat. Into this landscape of despair and ruin stepped Isabella, a queen whose true power would be measured not in glorious conquests, but in the quiet, gritty, and utterly essential work of rebuilding from the ground up. Isabella's approach to this crisis was a masterclass in pragmatic leadership. She understood that the kingdom's survival and any hope of a future reconquest hinged on two fragile institutions, the remnants of the feudal army and the crippled but not broken military orders. Her strategy was one of deliberate and strategic empowerment. She moved quickly to issue a series of royal charters, documents that did far more than just grant land. These acts were a powerful signal of royal intent. She confirmed the orders' rights to any properties they still held, and crucially, granted them new privileges in the coastal cities that now formed the kingdom's lifeline. This might include exclusive rights to operate dockside warehouses in Acre, control over specific gatehouses in the walls of Tyre, or exemptions from certain tolls and taxes. These were not mere symbolic gestures. In a struggling economy where every coin counted, these privileges gave the Templars and Hospitallers a significant economic advantage, allowing them to maximize the profits from their remaining estates and the goods flowing through their ports. This steady stream of income was the essential fuel for their recovery, funding the recruitment of new brothers from Europe, the rebuilding of their shattered galleys, and the slow, expensive process of rearming their knights. Perhaps her most visionary reform was her active encouragement of recruitment. Isabella recognized that the old model of relying solely on knights arriving from Europe on occasional crusades was no longer sufficient. The kingdom needed a permanent, professional standing force, and the military orders were the only entities capable of providing it. She used her position and her court to actively promote the order's mission, lending her royal prestige to their cause. A young, landless knight from France or Italy arriving in Acre would find a court where service to the Templars or Hospitallers was not just respected, but actively celebrated as the most honorable path for a warrior. Isabella's endorsement helped reshape the narrative around these orders after their devastating defeats, transforming them from symbols of a lost cause back into beacons of sacred purpose. This royal sponsorship was a powerful recruitment tool, helping to slowly refill their decimated ranks with a new generation of dedicated fighters who saw service in the East not as a fool's errand, but as a queen's calling. Yet her most daunting challenge lay not in managing resources, but in managing people. The remaining Christian nobility in the Levant were a fractured, traumatized, and deeply quarrelsome bunch. Old rivalries between powerful families like the Ibelins and the Lusignans festered, threatening to erupt into open conflict at any moment. A dispute over a stolen shipment of silk or the boundaries of a ravaged vineyard could quickly escalate, diverting precious military resources away from the kingdom's external enemies and toward internal squabbles. Isabella possessed a remarkable talent for mediation. She used her court as a neutral ground, a place where warring barons could be summoned, compelled to sit across from one another, and forced to air their grievances under the patient gaze of their queen. She skillfully played the role of a neutral arbiter, finding compromises that allowed each side to save face while prioritizing the kingdom's overarching need for unity. By preventing these petty conflicts from spiraling out of control, she performed an invaluable service for the military orders. She ensured that the Templars and Hospitallers were not constantly being pulled into the middle of local feuds as reluctant peacekeepers or partisan actors. Instead, they could focus their entire attention on their primary mission, defending the shrunken realm from its external foes and planning for the future. Isabella I's legacy is a powerful testament to a different kind of strength, the strength of the rebuilder, the healer, and the unifier. She took a broken kingdom and gave it the precious gifts of stability and time, allowing the essential institutions at its heart to mend, adapt, and prepare for the struggles yet to come. Now consider the precarious and often surreal world of royal succession in the Crusader states, where a crown could be claimed not only by right of blood but through the shrewd cultivation of powerful allies. In this high-stakes arena, Maria of Antioch emerges as a master strategist, a woman who understood that in the absence of a clear army or a full treasury, legitimacy could be purchased with promises to the right people. As the daughter of Prince Bohemond IV of Antioch and Melisend of Lusignan, Maria possessed a compelling, though contested, claim to the throne of Jerusalem in the mid-13th century. The kingdom by this time was a ghost of its former self, its territory shrunk to a sliver of coastline, its authority constantly challenged by internal factions and external enemies. The throne itself was a perilous seat, but it represented the last vestige of a divine mandate to rule the Holy Land, making it a prize worth any risk. Maria's bid for power offers us a fascinating case study in the raw mechanics of medieval politics, revealing how the military orders had evolved from mere defenders of the realm into its ultimate power brokers. Maria's campaign was not built on military might or overwhelming popular support. It was constructed on a foundation of meticulously negotiated promises. She recognized that the two institutions with the greatest capacity to crown a king, or to prevent one from being crowned, were the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. Their influence was multifaceted. They controlled significant military forces within the remaining Crusader territories. Their international networks meant they could lobby the Pope and European monarchs on a claimant's behalf. Perhaps most importantly, they possessed an aura of spiritual legitimacy. Their endorsement could frame a candidate not as a power-hungry aristocrat, but as God's chosen instrument for the kingdom's salvation. Maria approached them not as a supplicant but as a deal-maker. Her offer was straightforward and immensely attractive. In exchange for their public backing, she would issue sweeping confirmations of all their existing privileges, lands, and legal immunities. Furthermore, she pledged substantial new donations from the royal demesne once she was crowned. This was not a vague assurance of future goodwill, it was a detailed political contract. She was effectively offering to make the military orders the primary financial and judicial beneficiaries of her reign, tying the crown's fortunes directly to their own. For the Templars and Hospitallers, this presented a calculated risk with a potentially enormous payoff. Backing the right claimant could secure their position for a generation, protecting their assets and expanding their influence. Their decision-making would have been coldly pragmatic. They would have weighed Maria's blood claim against that of her rival, Hugh of Antioch, assessing which candidate was more likely to honor their commitments and, crucially, which one was more likely to win. Their support was never given out of loyalty to a person, but out of devotion to their own self-preservation and mission. By entertaining Maria's proposals, they were flexing their political muscle, demonstrating to the entire nobility that no one could rule Jerusalem without first coming to terms with them. This transformed the orders from servants of the crown into its kingmakers, holding the delicate balance of power in their hands. Maria's story brilliantly illuminates this reciprocal dance of patronage. She needed their strength to claim authority, and they needed her promised authority to guarantee their future strength. Ultimately, Maria's ambitious play was thwarted. The High Court of Jerusalem, along with powerful baronial factions, ultimately threw their support behind her cousin, Hugh of Antioch, who ruled as Hugh III. Her failure, however, is just as instructive as any success would have been. It underscores the limits of this kind of transactional politics. While the military orders were powerful, they were not all-powerful. They still had to navigate the complex web of aristocratic rivalries and legal traditions. A claim that was too weak, or a candidate who lacked sufficient broad-based support among the native nobility, could not be elevated by the orders backing alone. Yet, the very fact that Maria pursued this strategy so directly confirms its fundamental soundness. She was operating on a well-understood principle of crusader politics. The road to the throne in Jerusalem ran straight through the chapter houses of the Templars and Hospitallers. Her bid, though unsuccessful, stands as a powerful testament to the political acumen of women in this era, who skillfully leveraged every available asset, not just land or armies, but promises, legalities, and alliances, in their relentless pursuit of power. While the Christian foothold on the mainland continued to crumble, the island of Cyprus grew ever more critical, transforming from a mere supply depot into the final command center for the entire crusading enterprise in the east. It was onto this precarious stage that Placence of Antioch stepped, becoming regent for her young son, Hugh II, at a moment when the very survival of the crusading ideal seemed to hinge on the island's stability. Her reign was not about glorious conquest. It was a masterclass in the unglamorous yet utterly vital work of sustaining a war effort from the rear. She understood with crystal clarity that Cyprus was now the indispensable anchor, the one secure base from which any hope of future action against the rising Mamluk threat could be launched. And holding that anchor steady required an unwavering partnership with the only institutions that still possessed the reach and resolve to strike back, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. Placence's first and most crucial act was one of deliberate and public reaffirmation. Shortly after assuming the regency, she formally confirmed all the extensive privileges and land holdings of the military orders on the island. In the uncertain atmosphere of a minority rule, this was far more than a bureaucratic gesture. It was a powerful signal of continuity and commitment. For the Templars and Hospitallers, whose assets across the Levant were being systematically erased by the Mamluks, Cyprus represented their last major strategic redoubt. The orders had transferred their central headquarters to the island, making it the new heart of their operations. A confirmation from the regent assured them that their commanderies, their warehouses, and their training grounds would remain secure under her protection. This stability was the bedrock upon which everything else was built. It gave the orders the confidence to invest their remaining resources into the island, to build up its ports, and to plan for the long term, knowing they had a reliable ally in the Cypriot court. Her support, however, extended far beyond pen and parchment. Placence actively leveraged the island's greatest strategic asset, its ports. Cities like Famagusta and Limassol became the primary launchpads for any military action aimed at the Egyptian and Syrian coasts. Placence didn't just allow the orders to use these harbors, she actively facilitated their operations. She ensured their galleys had priority access to dockyards for repairs and maintenance. She smoothed over any disputes with local merchants or port officials, guaranteeing that shipments of weapons, armor, and new recruits from Europe could be unloaded without delay and forwarded to the order's headquarters. She understood that these logistical arteries were the lifeline of the crusade, and she dedicated her administration to keeping them flowing smoothly. Under her watch, Cyprus became more than a base. it became a perfectly tuned instrument of war, and the military orders were its most skilled players. Perhaps her most visionary contribution was her role as an international diplomat for the order's cause. Plaisance recognized that the resources of Cyprus alone were insufficient to sustain the fight. The ultimate source of money, men, and material lay in the courts of Europe, but the urgency of the situation in the East was often lost amid the complex politics of kings and popes. Plaisance became a crucial link, a trusted voice who could translate the desperate needs of the front line into a language European powers understood. She maintained a vigorous correspondence with leaders like King Louis IX of France, detailing the strategic situation and explicitly advocating for the Templars and Hospitallers. Her letters were not generic pleas for help. They were specific requests outlining the types of ships, the specific siege engines, or the quantities of funds required for a proposed campaign. Her status as a ruling regent gave these requests immense weight, elevating them above the noise of other petitioners. She effectively acted as the order's most powerful lobbyist, using her diplomatic channels to ensure that when aid was sent from Europe, it was directed precisely to the institutions she knew could use it most effectively. Through Plaisance of Antioch, the island of Cyprus found its voice on the international stage, a voice that spoke with authority and one singular purpose: to ensure that the defenders of the faith, though pushed to the sea, would never be forgotten. Now we arrive at a moment of profound finality, a chapter in the crusading saga that feels less like a battle and more like a slow, inevitable sunset. The year is 1289, and the great crusader states that had once stretched proudly along the Levantine coast have been reduced to a handful of beleaguered cities, each holding its breath against the rising tide of Mamluk expansion. Among these final bastions was the county of Tripoli, and its ruler was a woman facing an impossible task, Lucia, the last countess of Tripoli. Her story is not one of glorious reversal or miraculous victory, but something perhaps even more powerful, a testament to the sheer tenacity of the human spirit and the depth of loyalty that could exist between a ruler and the institutions she relied upon, even when all hope was truly lost. To understand the weight on Lucia's shoulders, we must first feel the atmosphere of those final years. The Mamluks, under the formidable Sultan Kalawan, were not merely an enemy, they were an inexorable force of nature. They had systematically dismantled the Crusader presence, capturing the great fortress of Crac des Chevaliers in 1271 and reducing the mighty principality of Antioch to a memory. Each victory made them stronger, while each Christian defeat further demoralized the West and stretched the remaining resources of the orders to a threadbare thinness. Tripoli itself was a city living on borrowed time, its citizens and defenders acutely aware that they were likely next on the Sultan's list. In this atmosphere of impending doom, leadership required more than just strategic acumen. It demanded immense emotional fortitude, the courage to prepare for a last stand, knowing it would almost certainly be just that, the last stand. Lucia's strategy in these final years was not one of grand, foolhardy offensives, but of pragmatic, desperate consolidation. She understood that her only chance to prolong Tripoli's existence, even for a few more months or years, lay in a single, unwavering source of strength: the combined might of the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. These orders, though also weakened by decades of relentless warfare, still represented the most disciplined, experienced, and dedicated fighting force left in the East. They were the only units capable of mounting a coordinated defense against the Mamluk siege engines and tactics. Lucia's most crucial acts as countess were a series of deliberate grants and confirmations to these orders. She signed over valuable tracts of land within her county and confirmed their rights to key properties within the city of Tripoli itself. This was not the generous patronage of a wealthy ruler in a time of peace. This was the calculated investment of a commander deploying her final reserves. She was effectively handing the keys to her kingdom's defense to the experts, betting everything on their ability to hold the line. This created a powerful, symbiotic relationship in the face of annihilation. For the Templars and Hospitallers, Lucia's unwavering support provided a clear mandate and the local authority they needed to fully integrate into Tripoli's defense structure. They weren't outside mercenaries, they were partners vested with the Countess's own authority. For Lucia, their presence meant that the city's walls were manned by soldiers who would not break and run at the first sight of the Mamluk banners. They were men who had taken vows to fight to the death, and they intended to honor them. This alliance was tested during the final, brutal siege in the spring of 1289. As Calawan's massive army surrounded the city, Lucia's leadership would have been fused with that of the Templar and Hospitaller commanders. Together, they would have organized the defense, assigned sectors of the wall to different units, and tried to counter the relentless Mamluk mining operations that sought to undermine the foundations of their world. The fall of Tripoli, when it came, was swift and brutal. Despite a fierce resistance, the Mamluks breached the walls and the city was overrun. Lucia herself managed to escape the slaughter, fleeing to the relative safety of Cyprus, but her county was erased from the map. Her story could easily be framed as a simple tragedy, a tale of failure, but to view it through that lens is to miss its profound significance. Lucia's reign represents the absolute furthest extension of the model we've seen throughout this history, the powerful, collaborative partnership between a woman ruler and the military orders. She did not abandon them in the face of impossible odds, and they did not abandon her. They fought side by side until the very last moment, upholding their mutual commitments even in the shadow of certain defeat. Her legacy is a poignant and powerful reminder that courage is not defined by victory, but by the quality of one's resolve when victory is no longer possible. She held true to the alliance until the end, a final, brilliant flash of resilience in the dying light of the Crusader states. So as we reflect on the stories of these 25 remarkable women, a far richer and more complex tapestry of history comes into view, one where influence was woven through many different threads. We've journeyed from the royal courts of Jerusalem to the administrative hubs of Flanders, from the besieged walls of Beirut to the quiet cloisters of Fontevraud. We've seen queens like Melisend and Blanche of Castile use their sovereign authority to grant legitimacy and resources, embedding the military orders into the very fabric of royal power. We've encountered strategists like Hoderna and Alice of Champagne, whose skills in diplomacy and mediation created the stable political environments the orders needed to thrive. We've met partners in defense like Stephanie of Milly and Juliana of Grenier, who stood shoulder to shoulder with knights on the ramparts, their fates intertwined in the defense of a common home. And we've uncovered the vital, often overlooked roles of women like Beatrice of Burburg and Petronilla of Camillé, who managed the vast economic engines and provided the spiritual sustenance that fueled the entire crusading endeavor. What unites them all is a demonstration of power that defies simplistic definition. Their authority rarely came from a title alone. Instead, it was exercised through savvy negotiation, shrewd economic management, cultural patronage, and an unshakable force of will. They operated within the constraints of their era, yet consistently found ways to bend those constraints to their purpose, proving that influence is not a single tool but a diverse toolkit. A queen's charter, an abbess's prayer, a noblewoman's ledger, and a countess's alliance were all instruments of profound change. This collective legacy challenges the enduring image of the Crusades as a solely masculine affair of clashing swords and armored knights. It forces us to expand our understanding of what it meant to build, sustain, and defend these legendary institutions. The battlefield was only the most visible stage. The true foundation was laid in scriptoria, in council chambers, on managed estates, and in the unwavering conviction of women who believed in the cause. Recognizing these figures does more than just add a few new names to the historical record. It fundamentally reorients our perspective. It asks us to listen for the whispers that have been drowned out by the roar of battle, and to look for the hands that held the pen, the purse, and the peace treaty, not just the sword. This enriched understanding invites us to question other narratives we've taken for granted. What other stories have been marginalized? What other voices are waiting to be heard? History is not a closed book with a single author. It is a sprawling, collaborative, and often contentious project. And by rediscovering these forgotten contributors, we don't just learn about the past, we gain a deeper, more honest, and infinitely more interesting story about who we are and how we got here. If this journey into the hidden influences behind the Crusading Orders has sparked your curiosity, then you have already taken the first step. If these stories of influential women behind the Crusading Orders have sparked your curiosity and left you inspired, we'd love to hear from you. Which of these formidable women resonated with you the most? Was it the strategic brilliance of Melisend of Jerusalem, the administrative genius of Beatrice of Burburg, or the spiritual leadership of Iovtar of Bethany? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights and reflections help build a community passionate about uncovering history's hidden layers. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an exploration into the forgotten figures and untold stories of the past. By engaging with this content, you're helping to amplify these long-overlooked voices and ensuring that history is remembered in all its rich, multifaceted complexity. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep looking beyond the surface and remember, the most compelling stories are often the ones waiting just beneath the headlines.